United Nations should be ashamed of itself, and the world should be ashamed of itself.
How could one ignore what's happening in West Papua? We're talking like, 500,000 people. The atrocities are horrendous in West Papua.
Ash Brennan from For West Papua campaign, here to talk about West Papua, which is not something that's known to most Australians. But Jordan, you've got a very personal family connection to Papua. Do you want to tell us what that is?
Yeah, I actually didn't dig too deep into it until hearing about Ash's campaign, because I didn't know that there was a conflict of any description going on until you brought it to light. But I kind of grew up with a bunch of fantastical stories from my grandma, who grew up there as a little girl. Her father had received a land grant in New Britain, which is up north, I believe, New Guinea. And that was kind of like a returned serviceman situation. He was a casualty of First World War, received some land, lived up there, I think developed a plantation, 2, maybe 3, found some success. Second World War came around, and everyone was advised to get the fuck out of Dodge, basically. Japanese were coming. He brought his family to Oz, returned to defend his plantation. Upon return, in his words, everyone was dead. Everyone was dead. The Japanese army had run out of supplies. They were feeding on the children, the native children, the children of allies who'd moved there, and it was just fucking chaos, basically. Got to the point that his...
So what do you mean by feeding on the children? Tell
us.
They
They literally had run out of supplies. So the Japanese military who were based there at the time ran out of their supplies and turned to cannibalism to survive. Word is the children were kept nailed to trees, kept alive, and chunks cut out of them come dinner time. But he stuck it out. Second World War finished. Japanese left, but he did still find a few hidden in his land, even up to years later, still thinking there was a war going on, and they were hiding, they were living off rats and shit. But come the end of his time on Earth, the casualties sustained in World War I had gotten the better of him. He only had half a stomach, and to find some sort of medical aid, he was carried by the natives over hills, across plantations, a couple of miles apparently, and such was the alliance between the Australians and the natives at the time that they'd do anything for each other, really, physical or otherwise. He made it to hospital as a memento, as a gift. He gave his dog tags to the natives. On those dog tags it did say, "Do not give morphine." Right, and so that was there for a purpose. He was disastrously allergic to morphine. When he landed in hospital, they gave him morphine straight up, and he died. That was the end of him. But I thought it was a striking story because it sort of tells of just how close the Australians were to the natives at the time. And then when I checked out Ash's doco, the Punks for West Papua, I saw that Australia's largely turning a blind eye to some of the shit that's going down over there, and it's a shock and it's a shame, and that's all I know about it.
So your grandfather, the Papuans put themselves in danger, in harm's way, to get him to a hospital. Great-grandfather. They carried him through the jungle.
Yeah.
He had gone back to fight for the Papuans and for the Australians who lived there as well.
Exactly.
Being the natives. Like you said, there's this phenomenal bond, and there's bloodshed on both sides for a common cause. And yet now, Ash, what's happening in Papua? Do you want
to... In a nutshell, for the last 50 years, 500,000 West Papuans have been murdered by Indonesian military. It's all because the world's biggest gold mine is smack bang in the middle of West Papua. It's very resource rich, and the Indonesians, some say, were given West Papuan sovereignty in 1962. And in 1969, they held a so-called free vote called the Act of Free Choice, where all of West Papua all West Papuans were meant to vote for West Papuan independence or Indonesian rule. Instead of giving the 1 million West Papuans the vote, Indonesians handpicked about 1,000 people and held them at gunpoint. And basically said, you vote for us. That was overlooked by Australian officials, American officials and the UN. And ever since then, nothing's really changed. West Papuans are still killed, and human rights abuses are disgusting. Thousands of people go missing, tortured, raped. And, for me personally, there's a lot of bad things going on around the world, but the Australian government assists Indonesia in this genocide. Our taxpayer dollars go to funding Indonesian special forces, which kill the West Papuans, and in the 1980s, we gave Indonesia some military hardware, which were responsible for some murders in the West Papuan highlands.
So we're talking about West Papua, which was probably only a couple of 100 kilometres from the
250
Australian
kilometres,
coast.
it's our closest neighbour.
So it's 250 kilometres.
Apparently you can walk at certain times. Might take a little bit of a wade, but yeah.
Yep.
So it's right on our doorstep.
Mhm.
There's this sort of blood allegiance that's come from Papuans helping us helping Papuans, especially during World War II. And yet we've somehow just let these people be colonised by Indonesia at gunpoint. Now, colonisation is something that if you do raise it, most people think, oh, it's something that the British Empire did in the 1850s and nasty, and it's part of the past. Indonesia has colonised by violence West Papua, which up to that point in time was its own country. It was under the stewardship of some other countries.
The Dutch.
Yeah. But they were not exploiting that in the way that has happened since. And so Indonesia, tell us about some examples of just how they behave towards the indigenous Papuan population there.
Well, right behind us is the Morning Star flag. That's the flag of West Papua. You wave that in West Papua, that's 15 years jail for treason. You sing native West Papuan songs, 15 years jail for treason. That's the kind of disrespect they have for the West Papuans, and it's not obviously the human rights abuses and everything is just hideous, but whether you're a child, even last week there were children killed by Indonesian military. And largely it goes unnoticed because the Indonesian government ban all foreign media. So no foreign media in or out. It's only really the advent of social media in the last 10 years that people are starting to
See
out.
trophy shots and shit,
Yeah,
like
yeah,
Malay
trophy
massacre type stuff, like
Yeah.
holding up natives' heads and like and
Yeah.
selfies with dead kids.
Selfies of dead kids and stuff, man. Yeah, it's disgusting, mate. And I've got a big background in television and film, so I made a film called Punks for West Papua, which, for my little backyard doco, it punched above its weight a little bit. But the reason why I got involved in that was because I was reading about the Ballabo Five and, Roger East and a couple of other journalists who were killed by Indonesian military. And that's people in our industry who were killed, and the Australian Federal Police has dropped the case. Now, you and I, we travel the world, covering television. And how would our families feel if our government didn't have our backs, if we were unfortunately killed overseas? I think that's disgusting.
And yet, these people who had your great-grandfather's back and risked their lives for it, our government has now turned their back on them.
Yep.
And what blows me away is, I'm sure all of the audience are aware of the Rohingya crisis, Syria, the migration concerns in Turkey and Greece at the moment. Many people will be able to tell you exactly what's happening with the Rohingya. And yet, 500,000 people being systematically genocide as government policy, which is what you're telling me here has happened.
And we're helping fund it.
And we're helping fund it.
Why do you think the Australian media are refusing to cover this in almost any way?
Because it's messy, it's not sexy, it's hard to say it's not sexy, but
Bring Yarn Event back,
yeah,
might get a bit sexy.
apart from the foreign media ban, reports coming out of West Papua are questioned all the time because there's no one on the ground to verify the reports, right? And any good journalist would want somebody on the ground to verify the reports, right? So that's not happening. In 2006, 43 West Papuans came here on a claimed refugee status on a boat, and we gave them refugee status, and that really pissed off the Indonesians, so much so that our foreign ministers met and signed what was called the Lombok Treaty, which, besides a lot of other things, basically gags Australia from talking about West Papua. We're not allowed to question their sovereignty, and that's why we're all quiet about it, and it upsets me, we see protests in the street for Jerusalem and all that, and that's fair enough. But, you know, a West Papua protest, lucky if we get 5 people, you know, and it's disgusting. And
It's because we don't know about it.
yeah. So if my little film or the gigs that I organise can make a difference and let people know about it, hopefully people can vote.
One of the most interesting things is you were saying that there's very little journalism on it. You've obviously met a fair number of West Papuans.
Mm-hmm.
Can you tell me some of the personal stories that you've heard firsthand about just how brutal their suffering is over there?
Okay, so my interest, the catalyst which made me make the documentary Punks for West Papua was meeting with Free West Papuan leader Benny Wenda. When he was a child.
He's super cool. This is the ukulele guy.
Yeah. Nobel Peace Prize nominee.
Yeah.
I've been to his house, met his kids and his family. Just a legend bloke.
Yeah.
Well, as a kid, his village was bombed by Indonesian military. You know, he witnessed family members killed, raped, tortured. And later in life, he became the chief of his village. And by raising that flag and singing with his villagers West Papuan songs, he was sentenced to 25 years prison. When he was in there, he was tortured, attempts made on his life. Eventually he escaped, only person ever to escape. And the underground got him out 3 weeks through the Papuan jungles till he got to Papua New Guinea. And a friend of his got him free passage to the UK, Oxford, where he lives today.
Wow.
Just that story alone, I'm like, wow, these are people in a village, and that was bombed, you know.
When would that have been, 1970?
Benny's my age, so yeah, it would have been the 70s. Yeah.
Wow. And yet that's still, the atrocities are still happening.
Yeah.
What are some of the other atrocities you've been aware of there?
Kids handing out, they were raising money for cyclone relief in Vanuatu, were shot dead. More recently, a petition has circled, was smuggled through West Papua, signed by 1.8 million West Papuans for independence. That petition was delivered to the UN in New York. That trip was paid for by our Rockin' for West Papua gigs. But people suspected of signing that petition were arrested and tortured. At the moment, there's a gentleman called Yanko who he's facing 15 years prison for getting people to sign a petition. And that's all it is, mate.
So how does this differ to life on the other side if you're not living in the West? So the rest of Papua New Guinea,
Okay.
that isn't occupied by Indonesia.
Okay, so geographically, what we know is Papua New Guinea. West Papua is the western side of it. Okay, so split in half. That side's Papua New Guinea that has its independence since 1975. The rest of it's controlled by Indonesia. Indonesia, like I said, are just with the help of Australia and American mining companies, just gutting the place. Like I said, the world's biggest gold mines there. You can see it from space. You know, and the Indonesian military earn $1 billion a year to guard that.
And none of the spoils go to the natives.
None of the spoils go to natives. They earn the equivalent of $2 a day, and all the money goes back into the military. And the military creates skirmishes so they can say we need to be here because this is happening when they're actually creating the conflict.
So it's not only brutal, violent colonialism, but it's mercenary behaviour.
Yes.
Where the West Papuans are simply collateral damage in their business deal.
That's right.
Wow.
That's right. And you know, the Indonesian military don't always wear the clothes. They're often dressed as civilians, and in every video you see civilian dressed Indonesian military, you know, kicking the heads of West Papuans or putting their foot on their heads. They just see them as second-rate citizens, and you know, not humans.
Just pure racism.
It's racism. Yeah.
How do you feel about this, Jordan, having the family connection going back?
I don't even know if that bears any extra impetus on it for me than if I was just a regular guy hearing about it. It's genocide, you know, it's Hitler shit. Like, it's stuff that, you know, you think is relegated to the history books, but it's happening right now and right next door. Well, it's a shock and it's a shame.
And we can't, and I always say, we can't talk about West Papua without acknowledging what's happening here in Australia with our own Indigenous, and you know, whether it's, you know, the Indians in America, you know, the West Papuans, Indigenous Australians, you know, the killing and displacement of natives or Indigenous First Nations people. It's got to fucking stop, mate. You know?
Yeah, absolutely.
It's got to stop, you know, because it's just corporate greed, and somebody's got to just go, no, that's enough. Or, I don't know what the answer is in today's corporate.
I do. We raise awareness.
Yeah.
We don't buy products. We don't go on holidays to these places.
Yeah.
We tell our local member if we meet them at whatever the event might be. We tell them that West Papua is front of mind.
Yeah.
We tell people in the media that they need to be reporting West Papua. We keep the conversation going.
That's right. That's right. And, people can raise a little bit of awareness. If you go to the Facebook page, you can get a Free West Papua t-shirt, which I'll give to you.
Thank you.
We also have some Rocket for West Papua t-shirts as well. Rocket for West Papua t-shirts.
Awesome. Thank you very much.
And, thanks for having me on.
Thanks,
Oh,
man.
Thanks, guys.
Thank you.
Really impressed
Appreciate
with what you're doing. Thank you very much.
Sure.